The opinions expressed are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the official positions of the sponsors, advertisers, or presenters. Advertising does not imply endorsement by the sponsors and presenters.
Hey guys, and welcome back to the Lighting Controls Podcast. We have another fantastic guest for you today, but before we jump into the conversation, let me take a minute to remind everyone today's episode is presented by the LCA, the Lighting Controls Association, and Light Fair. Do not forget, May 4 through 8, we will see you guys there.
And it's financially supported by the National Association of Innovative Lighting Distributors, or NAILD. Check out our website, lightingcontrolspodcast.com. Got a lot of information, including information about the NAILD LSC Lighting Specialist in Controls certification. Definitely worth your time checking that out if you're interested in learning more about lighting controls and stepping up your career. But also, huge shout out to our sponsor for this episode. We could not do this without your support, MW Connect. Check them out, mwconnect.us. They're an industry leader in award-winning Bluetooth mesh solutions. They have been in the industry for over 40 years. We had a great podcast episode with Margaret Wong, who is the owner of the company, and she talks about their humble beginnings, but they really have been in this industry for a very long time, and they know the industry inside and out. They want to be a part of your next project with lighting control solutions. And I think they're a really great resource. If you're unfamiliar with them or you've heard their old name, Mick Wong, check out MW Connect, which is what they've rebranded as, and see what they have to offer, because they're also standing by with a lot of support. They really like to make sure that projects go well. So check them out, mwconnect.us. But until then, let's jump into the conversation. So today we have Sara. Sara, do you mind just giving us a quick breakdown on who you are and what you do?
I'd be happy to. Thanks so much for having me today. My name is Sara Schonour, and I'm a lighting designer by training. I come from the Penn State Coalition, and I was at CannonDesign for around 16 years before the pandemic, like it did for so many people, spun me in a new direction. And after a couple other stops along the way, I now run a lighting adjacent business that does a little lighting design, but does a lot of things that are touching different parts of the lighting industry and a little beyond.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. And, I think what's interesting is you really do touch a lot of things. It's not just specifically lighting, but you get involved in a lot of different social outreach kinds of initiatives and stuff. But, just from your perspective and by all means, we're not trying to push you into a corner or anything, but when it comes to lighting controls, like, what is your perspective on that?
I don't think that you can separate lighting controls from lighting design. I'm one of the people that believes that a really good design begins and ends with understanding how that design is used, in the real world. And a lot of times that it involves control. And so I've always, as an architectural engineer, you are trained in controls as well. So it was never a separate thing when I entered the industry. I also worked at an architecture and engineering firm for a long time that treated those things under sort of one bucket. Our lighting studio sort of sprung out of the electrical group there. And so to me, it's a piece that lighting designers really need to at least have a fluency, in understanding. I'm hearing that language. I know that that's Italian. Like, I'm hearing that language. I know we're speaking, power over Ethernet, or I know we're speaking about Dolly systems. So just being able to identify sort of the key words, hello, goodbye, where's the bathroom, like the same kinds of architecture in lighting controls are really important for people to at least get by and make sure that what your intent happens in the real world.
Well, and so what would you say is like the hello, goodbye of the lighting controls language? Like, what are the terms that are the ones that you should know?
To me, I kind of harken back to the days when we were asked to do a presentation for the larger sort of firm at Canon, explaining like why we kept having all of these conversations about coordination around the lighting control system and why it was so complex. And this, of course, involved the electrical engineers. It involved project managers that were trying to explain things to clients. It involved architects that were trying to understand why there was so much junk on their walls and all kinds of other things. And we talked about, protocols being like languages, and having the different components of the system being able to at least have some translation between those languages. I think in today's terms, we even have Google Translate that allows these other, sort of efficiencies. But back then it was like, you can't speak this language without having this kind of interpreter, AKA the, whatever system you're working with, if it's 0 to 10, if it's Dolly, you can't just switch these things without a thought process about how these things all communicate together. And so to me, the hello, goodbye is at least understanding, how is the person using it on the front end? How is the user interacting with it? What sorts, is this happen automatically as a set it and forget it behind the scenes? Or do we want people to be able to, that's sort of, how are we going to introduce, that piece? And then this is an extended metaphor that I'm making up as I go along because you asked me to, but where is the bathroom is like, where are we putting the guts? Like, where does the driver go? How far can that be? Not unlike, just in architecture, you have these requirements and these distances and these things, controls are very much like that. You have to sort of understand the ground rules. And so, there's a bathroom somewhere, just point me in the right direction, and we can figure out how to make that connection. But you do have to sort of understand those basic things to be able to function in the society. Right. And so in this case, it's function in the conversation around lighting controls.
Yeah. And so, from that perspective, for a designer who might not fully understand the hello, goodbye, where's the bathroom kinds of language, where does one go to get that information? How does one start to learn about this?
Well, I mean, we can learn anything from so many different, I'm so sick of people telling me that it's too much information, it's too hard to learn. Literally take the URL that you're trying to understand and throw it to ChatGPT and get something. There's so many ways for you to get a handle on the basics of what we're looking at. You can listen to a podcast like yours, that's an investment in time, but there's also the snippets that you guys do and these other pieces and magazines and other things, or just have a conversation with somebody that is into it. Yeah. One of the wonderful things about the lighting profession is we all are so nerdy in our own little ways. And there's a nerdy person just for you. And if you care about color, let me introduce you to Dr. Esposito, right? If you care about, let me just connect you to the person that's just as nerdy as you are. And I think for lighting controls, that's such a broad nerdy category. It even has a podcast. There's no excuse for being able to find the information that, that you're looking for, or at least the next logical step in terms of who you can talk to get that piece.
I love it. It's so easy to take some of it for granted, and you don't even have to consider controls when, I just think about tape light, right? Everyone uses tape now when you're in soffits and stuff. I don't care if it's white. I don't care if it's color changing. There is a distance limitation from that driver to the tape light, and it is often not even considered or thought about until the poor electrician has to figure it out. And oftentimes, they don't necessarily read the cut sheets either. So they install the driver wherever, and then you're hoping that they upsize the wire accordingly based on voltage drop, because they've now got a 50-foot run from the driver to the tape when the manufacturer wants it to be less than 15. So it's simple things like that are often overlooked. But when that happens in a building times 50 floors over and over and over and over, it adds up very quickly. So finding ways to combat that is just so important these days.
Well, and I think you're kind of tapping into some of the under the surface frustration that different groups in our industry have with each other. And I include myself in all those groups because now I'm playing all the buckets, so I see it, I hear it in different ways that I did when I was kind of straight in the designer lane. But to your point, taken for granted. There's things that I think different groups don't quite understand about how their scopes are defined, how their fee is allocated, the timeline of how that fee works in design versus when we really kind of need it at the end, when we have actually picked a product, but we wasted a lot of fee trying to defend one product. And now we have to learn all about this product that appeared as a part of a value engineering. There's a lot of pieces that you don't see. And by the other side of it, somebody gets a drawing that says, here's a thing and here's a thing, figure that out. And hey, we expect, oh, well, you made a commission. Aren't you going to, use it to make a couple phone calls? It's like, that's not really, we're way beyond the technicalities of what we used to be able to get away with, incandescent dimming systems and, fluorescent ballast that had some pretty clear ground rules. And when I entered the industry in 2007, LEDs were a newfangled thing that we were kind of like, ooh, new toy, but definitely learning about. And then we all went through this whole transition of really learning what it meant and the pain. And we're still going through in my opinion, round one of the pain of, what's happening in this end of life cycle. And everybody's going, talk to me about why all lights are like purple blue now. And I'm like, no, we're not going for that. That's just what's happening, so
Yep.
I think we're there's still a lot that we don't know about LEDs. I think we're still going to see a lot of innovation and change. Maybe we'll be talking about something else in 10 years, who knows. But at the moment, you cannot just go with that's your job and point to somebody else, because and rightly so, everybody's coming to the table sooner together. There's specialty roles. Like I'm sure at some point we'll start talking about integrators, because I'm on like a train talking about integrators to everybody that will listen to me talk about the role that a good integrator, can play to a lighting designer in helping with exactly what you said. Just understanding the value of connecting the dots, being paid to connect the dots, wanting to connect the dots. It's really useful to have that kind of person on the team when, some lighting designers are really just there for a specific piece of the aesthetics. That's what their scope allowed for. That's what they got paid for. Maybe that's their jam. And there's other lighting designers that are like, give me everything. Like, let's do the whole thing. Let's coordinate right down to the gnat's little butt.
And this is a question I haven't asked in a while, I realize, but from your perspective, what is an integrator? Because that is a term that we so loosely use in this industry. And so
that's a great question. Actually, so timely too. Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. No. I was just saying, because as a result, we have a lot of miscommunication when we use that term. Just to kind of cover so much ground without really actually addressing what it is we specifically need. And so, from your perspective, what is the ideal definition of an integrator?
Well, I can't pretend that I'm the be all end all, because I feel like a baby deer in integrator land, just being like, wow, this is a beautiful forest. Why did nobody tell me about this forest? But I think, so the reason I said it's timely is because we're literally about to have an integrator conversation in the Boston IES chapter next week, where we're calling it Swimming in the Integration Channel, and we're having it in an integrator's office and having other folks that kind of touch all of those things weigh in on it. And one of the first things we're trying to define is, what do you mean when you say integrator? Because look at all the different places that integration sort of appears in all different kinds of of our work. Now that everything is digitized and all these systems are starting to connect and touch, and your sound and your lights are holding hands, and your security and, all these, and toys and all these other things that you can make happen. It means different things to different people. And, and then it goes beyond that. Like my family comes from the exhibit design business. And so it was always been ingrained in my mind that if you have a really fun, creative idea, you still need some really cool technical person or something that's going to help you make that interactive and that machine do that. Like when the kid presses the button 50,000 times, it still needs to do that. Like, how do you work through those problems? And so to me, the integrator, like if I was going to use layman's terms, is like this like superhero that comes in and understands, like it's the multi-translator language. That's like, I speak all these languages, and it's like Captain Planet, right? It has all these different superpowers. It's like, okay, you might not do everything, but a guy or a girl that's like, oh no, I got you. And then they bring in the shade person, and they bring in the acoustician that's like gonna nail the thing. So they are like the Captain, I don't know, I'm not good enough with these analogies, but like whoever's the boss there, that's like, I know all the superheroes. Like there's the guy in the wheelchair for the X-Men, right? That's the integrator. That's like, I see the whole picture. I see what you want to do. I'm going to make this work, and calmly tells you behind the scenes, it's going to cost you a lot because you're asking for a lot, but here's how we're going to do that. And then kind of makes that clear to all the people that need to understand their piece, including the owner often. This is how this is going to work, and this is why. And they usually have the biggest, clearest picture and the most maybe skin in the game to explain it the best, because they own a lot of the pain in the ass stuff that you have to do to make it all work at the end of the day. Especially, I see them in the longer term contracts and security and things, where it's not like sometimes the lighting's like, it's installed, it's aimed, we're done, bye. It's like, no, you're going to see this client every month. So if the lights are flickering or something bad happens, like they deeply care. And so it's a real partnership. And so I guess that's a long-winded way of an ideal. Like they have to be a superhero, they have to be really smart, they have to be a great project manager and coordinator and speak all the languages. But that's why I have such respect for them, for the good ones, that are working using their superpowers for good.
Well, and so if you don't mind me pushing you a little bit on that front, what does a bad integrator look like?
Okay, again, broad strokes here.
Yeah, totally.
I don't know everything about everything here, but what I can tell
No.
is just like it's very similar to, a good rep and a bad rep when you see those behaviors of acting as a partner and giving you information, particularly pricing information, lead time information that you can trust and then rely on. And then when push comes to shove, they're going to show up in a meeting and said, yes, I said that. Not like, well, let me bring 4 other people in to explain why I didn't really say that. But I mean, come on, we all got to have lunch at the end of the day. So to me, a bad integrator doesn't jump in and own and clearly show what they're owning as their piece. Like the best integrators usually have a really clear conversation up front of like, I'm going to be doing this. I'm going to have to weigh in on this, but I'm not doing that. And then this guy's going to have to, like, it's a very matrix or whatever the tool is. It's like everybody gets it. So when this really technical, complex stuff comes up, it's really clear to understand. I need to speak to that person. I need to coordinate with that person. So I think that's the special sauce is a good integrator helps. And a bad integrator, layers in extra numbers, can't explain where some of the math came from, won't give you real information. There's an emergency and so, the same bad behaviors that you start to see when you're like, this doesn't feel like a real partnership with others in the supply chain.
Yep. I was told there'd be no math in this job, and that was somebody lied. Someone lied.
Math isn't everything. I mean, look at nature, baby. Math is everywhere.
All right. So as we talk about integrators, in your sort of looking at that broader picture, the way you do, when is the ideal time to bring the integrator on board to the project?
Well, I mean, I'm a big believer because I came from the luxury of having a big firm where people could zoom out a little bit and really try to leverage their past experiences of when they didn't think things through, so as soon as you can identify the fact that there's going to be a gray area where nobody's going, oh, that's me, because it's pretty easy at the beginning when you're like, we're doing this, and you get to the narrative for this part of the system and nobody raises their hand, then you need an integrator, and I like it better when you're working with a client that's, when you do some repeat types of work, the client gets savvy and starts to include it in the RFP that I'm going to need somebody that wants to and is qualified to put this system together, not one or the other, but actually both at the same time.
So assuming that it's not in the RFP, right? Let's assume you're working at a design firm and you're working on this project and you realize, hey, this has really gotten complicated. I think we're going to need an integrator on this. It's not in your scope. So how do you then, now that you've identified that this is a possibility and a reality of the project, how do you go back to the architect or the owner and sort of get that ball rolling that, hey, here's a scope that everyone missed. We have a scope gap. This is what we need to do. How do you start that process?
Well, I mean, it's just as brave as you just did. I think we have a scope gap, as all in the good negotiations, you want to try to make sure that you tell them as soon as you can see it and present with a solution, right? And in best case scenario, they can think that the solution's theirs, right? That, hey, I'm a little nervous that nobody owns this. Do you want to go find out who does? Oh, we don't have someone to own that. Okay, well, I have three people or one person or whatever the case may be to get us started that I've used before as trusted partners, but I'm happy to help you vet somebody else. I have this list of questions, or here, and I should preface this with the best thing to have to start with is a really good scope written in your proposal that says what you're going to do and what you're not. So when somebody asks you to do something and you can't, you can say, it wasn't here, but I can help you figure that out. Either you're going to do some of it or you're going to bring somebody on or you're going to help them, find partners that can make that choice with them. But I think it's about trying to be, the best design partners also, just like any partner, if there's an issue, the information and time, they want to be trending together, tell me so I can work on it rather than it becomes this festering boil that we, there's stress and everything else later down the road.
But I think that's a really good point. That's something that we haven't really touched too much on, which is, what does scope look like? Like, how do you make sure to clearly outline scope? Because we talk a lot about owner project requirements, control intent narrative, stuff that you get when you work on when you're already hired on a project. But what about before you're hired on a project? What are the things that people should really be keeping an eye out for or pushing for when it comes to scope negotiations?
Well, I hate to overcomplicate things, but in these cases, I don't think you can over communicate what you plan to
Hmm.
do. And that's just based on just I'm a yes person. I try not to be. I'm learning my lessons, but you try to please people, and then all of a sudden you're like, this is not working for me. Like it just not doesn't make
Hmm.
sense anymore. And what I've learned is trying to be super super clear, just almost overly
Hmm.
clear. Like if they don't want to get into the weeds on that, they're definitely not going to want to get in the weeds of the sequence of operations with me, which we're going to need
Right.
to do if this is going to work. So that's a red flag for me already. And so, at Canon, I keep going back to that because that's the last time I had to use these real tools. And, the work that I'm
Hmm.
doing now is a little different. But I talk to
Hmm.
actually designers all the time now that have created a matrix that basically says, like, I do and own, somebody else
Hmm.
does, but I need input / approval on. Another thing that I'll give you input because I really care about it, but you might not care about what I think, and then the other things that are just like, this is really important for it to be coordinated, but you really don't need me to be a part of it. But somebody better think about this. And just bringing up, like, right there again, like, see how I'm
Hmm.
not doing egress lighting? Just pointing it out right here, or whatever the case may be. Like, so later on, because there will be a need for the egress lighting, like, let's get that
Right.
stress out up front so we're not dealing with time and stress at the same time, down the road.
No, I
So
think
I
I
think
think that's
tools like those matrices are a gift.
Yep.
absolutely, and I think that is really critical in communication, to have some way of documenting exactly what it is that you're responsible for. And
Hmm.
there are a lot of people who shy away from doing that because they are either afraid of taking on too much for the fee that they're asking for, or something to that effect. But I agree. I think thorough and complete communication is really the best way to ensure that you are signing up for the right scope. And if you're saying, well, I don't want to include that in my scope, then it's like, then put it in the opposite category of, I'm not doing that. And
Yeah, and
that way you've
understand that you
still
probably still
communicated.
need this,
Right.
and let the records show. We talked about this at one point. Unfortunately, we are in that kind of land, right? It can get
Yeah.
Hmm.
litigious, it can
Yep.
get finger pointy, and
Hmm.
I also, I don't think it will shock either of you if I tell you that architects and engineers are not the very best at, like, really holding their line with schedules and scope and timelines and things like that. It's I think if when people are agreeing to things that aren't quite clear, again, that's a red flag to me that maybe there's an experience level that we need to factor in, either on a fee perspective or a time estimate perspective, because if they're rushing
Hmm.
through these conversations, they probably haven't been through the trenches of coordinating it on the other end, or else they would go, oh yeah, this is value up front, because I've seen when people, you go like, hey, sorry, it wasn't my scope, and the owner wants to move in or get their occupation or whatever, certificate of occupation or whatever it is, occupancy. It's Friday. Can you give me a break?
I know. For those listening, we're recording on a Friday.
Yeah, thank you.
And it's
An
it's
unedited
been a long
Friday.
week.
Yeah.
Thank
It's
you.
been a
I
long
appreciate
week.
that.
So you talked about communication, and communication is vitally important. And it's funny when you start getting into you very quickly realize certain people prefer to communicate via text or via email or via phone call. And I think it's extremely important. I follow up everything with an email after, especially a phone conversation or a text message, for those exact documentation reasons, because it is so easy to unfortunately get stuck in finger pointing, or you said, or she said, or he said, and it can very quickly uh, take people into the weeds. And it's not always malicious, but it's, hey, we talked about this 6 months ago. Don't you remember that? And no, I don't necessarily remember that exact conversation.
Hmm.
So being able to document everything is super critical to making sure that projects are successful, especially when you start getting into the weeds of programming. So, all right. So we talked about integrators. How do you define an integrator as that third party person? I know Webster sort of started to touch on this. as that third party, like you talked about, that superhero. I'm going to buy myself a cape. Or, what do you consider manufacturer startups? Are they an integrator as well? Or is it just the manufacturer's technician? Like, where do you kind of draw the line at who's an integrator or who's a startup technician, or what terms do you use, I guess?
Well, this is like asking me how do you really define a lighting designer, right? Like if people are designing lights that are going into a building, are they or are they not designing light? I mean, to me, I'm not precious about it. I didn't come from the Black Cape School of lighting design. Like, if you're taking that power of drawing circles and lines on paper, then you're designing lighting. And in my opinion, you should think that through and understand the power that you have in your hands, So, in the same way, I think integrators can be a Venn diagram of different activities, and the really powerful integrators are the ones that can really own all of it. But I certainly think, you see smart building groups and things in different, like as a separate adjacency inside different types of businesses. And I think all of that, it can be valid. To me, it's more about being really clear again, like a lighting designer can do lots of different things. What things are you looking for this professional to do? Because the scope can really change based on the project. But I think, integration, I think, is more of a category than a lane, and once you get into that, it's just like lighting design. Like, you have lighting designers that are specifically in lighting controls. That's all they do, and they still consider themselves very much in the lighting design bubble, so I think integrators are very similar, that it's an amorphous thing. But by the same token, don't call yourself an integrator unless you're going to do the things an integrator does. So when all the integrators are around being like, hey, why are you calling yourself an integrator? Do you do this? Do you get certified? Do you learn? Do you, show up and listen and do these things and contribute to the industry? I think that's the same way as, as lighting designers. And we haven't gotten to the point where you can't call yourself an architect unless you're really an architect, and I don't think we should, because I really do think it's better for everybody, including, Gen Pop, that we all think like lighting designers. We all think like integrators, whether or not we really call ourselves that with alphabet soup behind our name.
No, and I think that's a really good point, because a lot of the beginnings to integrators and lighting designers are really just kind of this experiential thing. Nowadays, we do have formal education and certifications and everything, but a lot of integrators still are just kind of homebrew, mom and pop kind of places that over time become these behemoths.
Same
And
with lighting design, right? Out of the
same with lighting
primordial
designers,
soup of
yeah.
like architecture and interiors and engineering, like, a whole new profession has just sprung out.
No, I've had so many conversations with contractors where they're like, "Well, I'm not a lighting designer." It's like, "Whoa, hold on a second.
Well, you're taking the
You
faith
are a
for it
lighting
by you're
designer. Yeah,
owning it,
you're doing the
so
design."
you better own it then.
Right, exactly. So, I think it's the same thing with integration. It's like, are you owning that scope of integration? And so, kind of pulling back from integrators, pulling to kind of look at the larger scope of things, in the landscape of lighting design, are we serving the needs of projects? Are there still holes in scope, in responsibility, for these projects? Because there still are people who complain about a lot of projects that kind of go sideways. And is that kind of the result of poor coordination or somebody not being hired correctly or something to that effect? And I mean, I'm speaking huge broadly here, but from your perspective, I mean, we do still have a lot of challenges in this industry.
Yeah, I mean, I think based on the amount of conversation around these issues, I think we can tell that they're not solved. And I think a lot of that does come down to lay people understanding more about light and lighting systems. I think it's atrocious how little people really understand, and I take full responsibility for that as well. Even my inner circle, like my close family, messes up color temperature. And I'm like, how? What have I done wrong? We have had this conversation like as many times as possible. But, I don't think that the lighting industry as a whole has made it like a real concerted effort at education out there. Like whenever I'm at the bar after all our industry events and throw a couple back, you'll hear me talking about like, why don't we have a reality TV show? Like, where is the lighting designer on HGTV that shows up and it's like, okay, this looks good because, because it does look good and people just assume it happens and that
Right.
somebody waved their magic wand. And if you get the right interior designer, it's like, no, someone behind the scenes knows a thing or two about what they're doing. And for a second, we could split the screen and say, season 1 is all about CRI and CCT. But by the end of that, hopefully some people don't buy the blue frickin' LED because it's $1 cheaper at Home Depot because they know what 4000K means, It's so I think we have a lot of work to do to start pushing out. I mean, I'm not the first to say it. I won't be the last to say it. Lighting designers do a lot of talking to themselves inside instead of adjacent. Our other groups, that's why I don't consider myself, a distributor, educator, expert, but I love learning about them. And in the last 2 years, I've been spending more time with some guys and gals that are in the distribution realm. And it's just proven to me how little I know. And when I'm sitting in my little design bubble doing the things that they think designers do, I'm doing the same thing when I'm like, they're in their distributor bubble doing thing distribute. It's like, this is a lot of, stereotypes that we need to break down. And I think our industry needs to start inviting, people in, which is why, for example, I'm really happy about the IALD changing their rules and starting to say, let's have more conversations and let's, break these walls apart a little bit.
No, totally. And I think you brought up a really interesting point here that is adjacent to your point of disseminating information to the general population, but also just from a lighting designer standpoint, expertise requires awareness of the systems that are in place that provide the lighting once you hand the drawings over to the contractor or to the architect or whoever takes your drawings and then does something with it. And there are a lot of lighting designers out there who don't understand what happens between when they hand their drawings over and then when they go to a site visit review to check everything. It's almost like there's this black box of information that everything goes into. And it's the same thing with lighting controls. In fact, probably even more mysterious to them because in a lot of ways, the sales rep almost takes it over after a certain point. And then it's even more like, I don't know, like somebody buys something and then somebody installs it and then I show up and it's there. So I think that's also something we really need to do a better job of is getting internal education of adjacent and common formats and procedures within our industry. There's a lot of people who might say, oh, well, that's not my job, so I don't need to think about it. And it's like, but you kind of do need to think about that because, like, let's say, for instance, there's a hiccup in the chain. What happens? You're going to get the call. What do you say? And so that sort of logic just kind of breaks down rapidly. So, is there a way that we could address that internal educational need?
That's a great question. I mean, I think it really involves, again, the synergy of these educational groups that are working together. I think we're starting to see, I happen to be the educational director for the business of light. And so I've gotten many earfuls from the community because it's not just for lighting designers, it's for the whole industry about what the community needs in terms of education when it comes to sort of the topic of business. And one thing that's become really clear to me is everybody is making their own academy and their own podcast series and their own, like, there's a lot of really good efforts happening. And I think finding the people that are behind them and making sure that there's that first web of connectivity around the spoke of the wheel, because, well, for many reasons, one, burnout and, volunteerism and all those things. It's like creativity and energy are not, everlasting sources. And so the other thing is just the replication of effort. There is so much overlap in all of our industry that there's almost definitely somebody tackling the problem that you're working on, and somebody that just had a headache on that project, and so I think this rise of, forums and, different ways, Discord and all kinds of other things where we're starting to have these places where people can have these conversations because they don't belong in separate siloed channels. We're starting to see maybe some tools emerge. Like, do we need to create a workflow that's approved by distributors and contractors? And like, I could see a world where there's a document that's taught to kids learning lighting. This is how the channels work. Because right now they basically throw this big gobbledygook up on the screen. They're like, beware. just we told you that it's really crazy. Find a mentor. Like, that's kind of the message that we send to a lot of, like, it depends on your territory and whether or not you have good relationships and if they're a good or bad person.
Right.
Good luck, So I think if there was something we all could kind of agree on, that this is a best practice, and I don't love to standardize everything. I like to find the lines and break them, but these are useful tools to be like, if this is normal, let's just have a plan to deviate from. Like, how far are we going to go over here? Because we're off track. This is what's normal. So I'm not volunteering to head that effort up, but when you find the right group, I'm always worth at least 200 to 500 cents.
It's funny. You mentioned burnout, and especially when you're volunteering your time for certain things, it's very easy when you go to some of these meetings or go to various organizations and you talk about the same thing over and over and over. Your enthusiasm does start to kind of vary, right, from place to place. It can be a real impact, and people don't necessarily realize that. So you mentioned forums and making online platforms or having online platforms available that people can start to utilize to do their own research and follow up and have conversations with other people who may have been in a similar circumstance recently. Are there existing platforms and forums that you currently use that you could share with listeners? You're like, hey, why don't you check this out?
Yeah, absolutely. And before I give that advice, yes, burnout is so real. And I think for some reason, women talk about it maybe a little bit more than men talk about it, but you're hitting on the reason why I do so many different things now, and not just lighting, and not just sustainability, and not just NACLIC, and not just this and that. So nobody knows when I show up what the hell I'm going to talk about that day. They can't pin me down, but also it does keep me interested, because you can't always make progress in everything, and it's like you said, you sort of have to recharge the batteries. But one thing that I think is really cool, we're starting in the WILD group. There's now a mentoring program, and it's not one-to-one mentoring. It's actually a cohort style mentoring.
And we set that up. Explain what WILD is for people who might not be familiar with that.
Oh, yes. See, you're good at this. You're like, wait, acronym lands. Yeah. So WILD is Women in Lighting and Design. And it's a national organization. It has a whole bunch of chapters and probably a city near you. And it basically is not just, of course, for women, but women and allies. So however you identify, you are welcome and WILD. But we have a mentoring program that's a cohort style, as I was saying. And we really tried hard to make sure that we mixed up the roles. So it's not just lighting designers, it's educators, it's reps, it's other people that are in the industry. There's fewer of those people to go around, but there are tons of those people that want to be involved. So I think we had 80 people in these 5-person cohorts this time. And I'm part of the group that manages it. So all the comments and things float up, and we hear what kinds of topics they're talking about. Coordination, understanding the chain, getting ahead of what are they talking about when they say this? And I was in this conversation, and that vocabulary, it's the same conversation. So finding a mentorship group or some place where they offer, the IAS also, like I think the New York City chapter is also propping one up. And I can't imagine that's not going to probably be a repeatable sort of endeavor across that organization, but people will mentor you, and so I think that's the piece, is to find those folks that are having that conversation, because they are. It's not just here. It's a whole big world, that lots of lights. The conversations in China are very different than they are here, but they're having the conversations too.
No, I love going to conferences, trying to find those people who look like they are completely lost and they have no idea what they're doing there, and talking to them and saying, hey, what's going on? Like, why are you here? Like, and usually you get some really great stories out of that, and then you can help them. You can say, hey, you're looking for this, okay, go over here, or check out this seminar. That should help you understand that some more, or even just taking time to tell them something. Like,
you're a treasure to the industry. Give this guy an award. Where's the Distinguished Service Committee? That's an amazing thing that you do, but I think it brings together, again, the point that, like, we didn't come here intentionally, probably. I mean, You're right that now there are a lot of people that can learn about lighting at an earlier age and say, hey, that might be for me. But I think the vast majority of people enter, however they got into this part of the industry, by mistake or by chance or by this great relationship that just landed them here. So, yeah, I mean, there is something here for everyone, but we we do have to, the veterans like us that have been around long enough to know the landscape need to be like, oh, you don't, you belong in this tent too, but your people are over there. Like, that's where you want to be, you know?
Totally. Well, and I think that comes from my beginnings in this industry. I felt very much lost at sea, and there weren't a lot of people, who were like, "Yeah, let me mentor you and teach you and help you learn this." My mentor was my supervisor, which she was great, but it was like, how do I diversify? How do I get more information? And there wasn't a lot of that, and there still is. It's kind of like you're a kid in a subway station, and everybody's rushing to get to where they're going, and that kid just is like, where do I go? How do I achieve anything here? And
It
nobody's
forces a
paying
life
attention.
lesson of figuring out what piece you want to do, because it can
Yeah.
get overwhelming to try to do it all. I think a lot of people have tried to do it all and,
Mhm.
and again, burnout
Yeah.
or whatever the case may be, or you find the thing that really does light you up, because I'm really a
Hmm.
firm believer that you can probably do anything you want to do. You might not love doing it. So are you proving that you can do it, or do you, because once you find that thing you love to do, it comes so naturally, it doesn't feel like it's really work. And you're like, oh my God,
Hmm.
people are going to pay me to do that thing, but it's because you love it so much. And I think that's sometimes where that rub is. There's so much you can do in lighting and there's so much to learn, but really finding the thing and then being honest with yourself about what that thing is. And sometimes you're going to have to build yourself a niche or whatever that is,
Mhm.
because that's the kind of work that we're doing right now with this kind of technology.
Definitely. Well, we're almost out of time here, so I just want to like
Oh my
encapsulate
gosh,
this
that
because
flew
I think
by.
this is. I know, right?
Every time.
But like, yeah, we touched on such a core value that hits me so intensely, which is education, but not just education for the self, but for the industry. We
Mm.
really could do better if we just reached out, contacted multiple people outside of our industry, got a better awareness and understanding of how things worked. Um, you know, a lot of the issues that come up, as you noted, are coordination or communication issues, and part of that is just the language. Part of that is the hi, hello, goodbye, where's the bathroom kind of terms. And so as a result, if you can at least start learning those basic terms, you can start navigating this a lot more cleanly and a lot more smoothly and start learning more about what this industry has, how it works. And the industry does vary based on where you are, territory, firm, etc. But there are kind of consistencies, and you can kind of start picking up what those consistencies are. But it really kind of requires also that we do reach out to the layman, the people who are consuming what we're providing, so that they can actually understand and appreciate what we're providing. It going to the idea of a car, people don't really appreciate the intense amount of innovation that goes into a vehicle, but they still need it and they still use it.
Yep.
And so, um, you know, but lighting is not like a combustion engine. Lighting is a lot simpler, and so we could do a better job of getting people to understand what is color temperature, what is dimming, why do things behave the way they do, why do we have purple street lights, because it has a very basic explanation. And
Mhm.
so, and the more we get these people to understand, the better these kinds of communication channels and the justification for an integrator becomes, because it's like, yeah, there is a lot that goes on in an integration, and that's why it's so expensive, and you cannot get this without an integrator. You need an integrator to achieve this. um, and you know for a while, lighting didn't need integration because it didn't touch a lot of the different systems out there, but it is really kind of becoming a central cog in a lot of systems. So we really do need integration, and not just for the sense of building automation, but all these other fancy lighting designs that we're doing. And so, getting to that point where we are really helping ourselves, helping our industry understand all of this, can help us really achieve these high results. And so, I think it's great that there's a lot of mentorship programs out there, like, for instance, with Wild. We really do need good mentorship to be able to get not just the people who are currently in the industry up to speed, but the people who are going to be coming into the industry over the next 10 years. we're not gonna, it's not gonna stop changing, and it's not gonna stop. The people who are working in the industry now might not be working in the industry in 10 years. So we need to constantly be funneling this so that everybody is just on the same page, understanding the same language, and can really achieve high quality results, because really good lighting design has really gorgeous results and very satisfied customers and users. But really bad lighting and lighting controls design, it really puts a black stain on our industry and makes people wary of the success of an idea that's being pitched to them.
Amen.
I don't know if I hit everything that we talked about, but
There's so much too, but the thing that I hope I don't go down in history on this podcast is the hello, goodbye, where's the bathroom girl? But
Too
I
late.
think
Way too late.
well, to push the analogy too far, I mean, imagine if you didn't travel because you were afraid of the language barrier. I mean, how much would you miss out on if you were afraid to go? And what usually my experience is, as soon as you get there, someone will help you. You may have to pay a lot for your first time to take a top tier tour guide to see it all and really get it, but you could also do some research and find the go-getter that's doing the one-to-one business. And there's a lot of options out there. And the transportation system in Nepal is not the same as in France. But once you go, you can go, I've been there. Okay, I have a frame of reference for what we're talking about, and I can respect the new ecosystem that we're talking about here and how it's different. So I think it can be a little uncomfortable at the beginning, but so can travel. And what would you miss out on if you don't do it? I think that's what you're talking about with that great satisfaction and these really exciting projects and these things that do leverage the cool technologies that are starting to emerge, and let us lift our spirit and be more effective and be more functional and all those other good things that that those technologies promise.
Yeah, no, Sarah, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a fantastic conversation. And for anyone who doesn't believe in the idea of utilizing the other groups or just making a phone call, recently I was working on a project and I was getting nothing but roadblocks from the city. Couldn't get information. They forwarded me to this group. That group says they don't have it. They kicked me back to the other guy. I've been round and round and round. I've been ripping my hair out for weeks. Sure enough, a local rep in that area, who I know and love dearly, she is a sweetheart, calls me because she heard through the grapevine that I was working on this thing and says, I have all those records from 20 years ago, dear. And I was like, oh, I love you. Why didn't I call you 2 months ago? So just don't be afraid to pick up the phone sometimes, right? Like sometimes just knowing that there's someone else is going to have the answer who can help you and save you hours and hours and hours of time. And that is so key. If you learn nothing else from this episode other than hello, goodbye, where's the bathroom, you have learned that you need to pick up the phone and make those phone calls.
Yeah, we're all connected,
Sarah,
right?
absolutely. Thank you so much. This has been a great conversation. I will just close this out and remind everyone today's episode is presented by the LCA, the Lighting Controls Association, and Light Fair. We will see you guys there in May.
And it's also financially supported by the National Association of Innovative Lighting Distributors, or NAILD. Check out our website, lightingcontrolspodcast.com. We've got everything you want to know about the podcast and information about the training, the certification from NAILD, Lighting Specialist in Controls. You should check it out if you haven't heard about it yet. We are open for full registration now. So we're taking a look, seeing if you're interested, and register. Also, huge shout out to our sponsor. We could not do these episodes without your support. MW Connect. Check them out, mwconnect.us. They've been in the industry for over 40 years now. They know this industry. They're doing these coordination calls on a regular basis. They want to make sure that their projects are done well. They will help you understand their products. I went out to their facility once out in Sacramento, and they had a really great 2-day educational seminar on how to use their devices. So they really want to make sure that people are knowing their product and utilizing it for the benefit of the projects that they're involved in. So check them out, mwconnect.us. But until then, thank you so much for joining us. And Sarah, thank you. This was an awesome conversation.